question is how much space. I want to talk just for a minute about two things about piano playing that really, I think are really important in terms of expression and underspoken about, especially the first one, and affect playing, especially a simple passage like that. One of them is where your fingers are before they strike, or how they get from one place to another. Because playing a key is not just pushing it down from there, but it's how you get to that key. And so, as an experiment, I find a lot of students always put their finger as soon as possible on the next note. And they move their hand to the key and they put it down. And so, of course, there's no generalities that really work in music. Of course, sometimes it's good to do that. But so I noticed my student doing it all the time. So I asked him, can you take your finger and say, start 1 inch above the key and go straight down and play it, and play it. And so often, they move down and stop and play. They can't do it. And it creates a different kind of sound. And if you have your finger on the key, you can get a very gentle sound, especially on a piano that's so incredibly responsive as this one. And also, for playing big chords, if you're playing a loud chord, and if your fingers are above the key and you hit the chord, it's going to be harsh. And so the best way to get a big sound, put your fingers on the key, not obvious difference. We don't want that. And so there's no one way or another, but playing a melody, just moving to the key is part of the expression. And in a way, your fingertips, if you think of their just tip, where the tip is, and that's another thing. I asked them to lift their finger, and they lift their arm. The finger's stuck on the key, or lift their wrist or something. But the fingertip itself, it gets kind of a bell-like, clear sound if it's off the key. And repeated notes also, instead of, it's boring. And repeated notes too, all the additions, they mark the more recent changing fingers. So say the other 281, you see 5/4, 5/4, 5/4, as if they're apologizing for the fact that Mozart wrote a repeated note, and they're not musical repeated notes, so we have to hide them. But actually, it should be, right, a knocking sound. Same finger, the same finger from above the key. And even something like this, if your fingers are 1/4 of an inch off the key on each note before it goes down, it's much clearer. You get this kind of sparkle instead of what's so common. So something is not solid, and the student plays it on blurry. So then the first reaction is to try to play harder, push harder, make your fingers stronger. Actually, if you just lift them up a little bit off the key and keep them, which is not so easy, it takes some kind of thinking and practice, then there's a little bit of momentum, and it makes their technique suddenly so much better. Actually, I learned this through my own experience, and I had to figure this out for myself. I never noticed people talking about this in piano pedagogy, about where the fingers are, actually, fingertips, but at one point in my life, when I was a student, I entered a competition and I lost. And so I was so discouraged that I got tendinitis right away. But I think it was from that I got more tense. And so and at that time I realized the more I practiced something, the worse it got. That's a really depressing thought, all the hours you put into it, and it's getting worse and worse. I realized why. Actually, there was a simple reason, that I was training my fingers to go to the key as soon as possible. So the better I knew the piece, the sooner it would go onto the key. And if I was sight reading something, I'd have to move to there because it's a last minute decision. And so I found out that that's the key to, and so that freed my technique just so much. And I just try to share that with my students, but it's very difficult for students to make kind of basic change, especially the level of doctoral students, say. They've been playing so long one way or another. But anyway, so that's part of it. And the other thing about controlling this instrument is the pedal. This piano has an amazing pedal. And so that's another thing, of course, that students tend to, the first thing we learn about pedaling is to lift it on the next harmony. But that's not the end. But that's the end for a lot of students. And so it's so built into them that they just, it's all the way down and then they lift it exactly on the next harmony. And it's so difficult sometimes to get them to lift it before, let's say right before, or lift it either fast or slower. It's better not to pedal all the way through in general. Well, this time there's a staccato, but even places where there's just 2 chords in a row, to lift the pedal a little early, because that's another whole issue, and is legato pedaling, which was kind of discovered in the second half of the 19th century, and it seems that those little stars, you know, it says P-E-D, star, which is always earlier than you expect. Actually, it seems like that's what the reason why they wrote it like that is because that's how they pedal, until Liszt came along. But so for the F minor ballade, with the space before the next harmony, instead of, which is how people play in the 21st century most of the time. But especially for Mozart, to lift the pedal earlier, well, there are no good examples right here, but to have the control over your foot, that it can add so much poetry to the playing of how far you push it down also. I have another example here on, say, something like this. I mean, you could play with no pedal, but if you use a little pedal, and these are even scales, you're not supposed to pedal scales. And this you can't pedal. But this kind of thing, to pedal something like that, but not pushing it straight all the way down. Yeah, so here's, this is Concerto 467. That helps it instead of not pedaling for the scales at all, and especially this. I mean, I just find it so beautiful. So there's no one that you're supposed to pedal or not. I don't care. It's just. And then holding the left hand in strategic places so it doesn't totally change, because you can hold the bottom note sometimes. This piece, and so there's that, and going back to the thing about the fingers above the key, I have a student playing this right now. He's preparing for this Italy festival. He's a middle school kid. So he was playing this, and I couldn't in Mozart to make it come to life. And it has to have a drive, and the first one is kind of tentative, but still bouncy and bubbly, so it's not quite staccato, but if you keep your finger on the key, it sounds like that. It's hard, it's very hard on this piano. This is my issue of what this talk is supposed to be about, playing on a modern piano. I really have to practice just on this particular instrument to get this D to be clear. That's better. Then, I told my student every time he plays that he has to do something different. Every time they get to a cadenza spot, do something different. Even if it sounds horrible, and they do something totally... Let them do it, and don't say that it sounds horrible yet. If it gets to be time for them to play in the competition, you better settle on one particular cadenza. But let them have fun with it. And then you can listen to Schnabel's cadenza to this, which is totally atonal and sounds horrible, and that's Schnabel. And here's another case of pedaling that, and also it's, there's so much passion and life and changeability in Mozart. I mean, generally, simply the students often think that romantic music is the one that has all these changes of mood, and classical music is kind of calmer. But it's exactly the opposite, of course, and Mozart can change his character completely from one measure to another, and the person has to be able to switch as they're playing like that, because because the classical style of harmony was such a glue that held it together that they're able to do that. But the passion and the darkness too is in Mozart. Of course, that sounds like the 40th Symphony, and I'm sure that it meant something to him. It made something abstract, but similar, that same key. Underlying everything, that this is a long phrase, it's not finished, and then so, okay, those are my thoughts about it. That there are various expressive devices, for example, touch, which I'm trying to talk about in terms of where your fingers are. It's the best way to think about it. Of course, you have to have something to say with where your fingers are, but where they are makes a different sound, and if you are aware of it and think about it, the more you do it, the more they respond to how you feel and how you want the music to speak. And then the pedaling is really essentially important too, to making